Good afternoon, everybody. This is Charles Allen. So I'll look to Conti and Lynn to give me a thumbs up if we think we have critical mass or not.
Good afternoon.
So I'm looking for DC. Well, you're here. I guess
I'm
we're
here.
good. Yeah, that's right.
I am DC.
You are DC.
I think I saw my colleague, Councilmember Henderson here.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just was going down the list.
You know, I think DC, we're late to almost everything.
Oh yeah.
I'm here.
It's
I'm not late.
12:01.
For the record, Councilmember Henderson was here before me, so she was
Got it.
on time. Please let the record reflect that.
Well, we definitely have. We have DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and there's at least. Let's see. We just need 10, so I think we're good.
That's very good. Okay, well then why don't we go ahead and get started? And I assume what frequently happens is as you do the roll call, people will trickle in. So, but this way we can go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Allen, Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I will now call the TPB's March 17th, 2021 meeting to order. As we continue meeting virtually during the pandemic, we're going to continue to live stream the audio and video of this meeting online, as well as on our YouTube channel. I look forward to being able to have this meeting in person sometime later this year. I'm confident. While you are all familiar with our process for these virtual meetings, for the benefit of those watching us online or for the first time, let me briefly review the procedures that we will be following during this virtual meeting. First, I will ask Lynn to take a roll call of members or alternates to document your presence at this meeting and determine officially that we have a quorum. Then for agenda items, I'll have the presenter complete their briefing, then invite questions from members in turn by jurisdiction. For the action items on the agenda, once the presenter has completed the briefing, I will invite one of you to make a motion to adopt the resolution, followed by a second of that motion made. Then we'll invite questions from members by jurisdiction. At the end of discussions, I'll call for a vote, again by jurisdiction. And what I'll do is ask for only nay votes or abstentions. The rest of the votes from those present will be assumed to be a yes vote. Lastly, just a friendly reminder to always mute our microphones when we're not using them, and importantly to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you do speak. So Lynn, I understand comments from the public have been submitted, but do I first need to turn to you for a roll call before we turn to public comments?
Roll call first, please.
Roll call. Let me turn to you for roll call.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to list your agency or jurisdiction, and if you state your name, we'll capture your attendance. Also, I tend to go pretty quickly, so I apologize ahead of time. We will catch you in the participant list at all. We'll be monitoring it the whole time. You can also chat us up if you would like, or send me a private chat just to make sure. So I will start now with the District of Columbia, District Department of Transportation.
Hi, this is Anna Chamberlain.
Thank you. District Office of Planning.
This is Kristen.
Hello. City Council, Ms. Pinto. District City Council, Mr. Allen. Present, I know. District City Council, thank you. District City Council, Ms. Henderson.
Present.
Thank you. Moving on to the state of Maryland, Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis is here.
Thanks. City of Bowie.
Adrian Boaffa with the City of Bowie is here.
Thank you. Charles County.
Jason Groth, alternate.
Thank you. City of College Park.
Patrick Wen.
Thank you.
Denise Mitchell.
And just got you too. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Frederick County. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell here for the City of Frederick. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Hello. City of Gaithersburg. City of Greenbelt.
Emmett Jordan here.
Thanks. City of Laurel.
Mike is here.
Thanks. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich, alternate is here.
Thanks. Montgomery County Legislative. Mr. Glass, I'll keep an eye out. Prince George's County Executive.
Vic Weisberg, alternate here.
Thank you. Prince George's County Legislative.
Hi, Vice Chair Denny Taveras. What is it? Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thanks. City of Rockville.
Hi, Bridget Donald Newton's here, and I'm wearing the green and orange.
City of Tacoma Park.
Casey Kostick here. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Maryland Senate is vacant, so I'll go to the Maryland House of Delegates. Foreman or Grimm. Okay, moving on to Virginia, Virginia Department of Transportation.
Maria Sinner is here. Hello.
City of Alexandria.
Kanick, present.
Thank you. Arlington County.
Christian Dorsey is present.
Thank you. City of Fairfax.
David Meyer from the City of Fairfax.
Thank you. Fairfax County Legislative.
Supervisor Alcorn's here.
James Walkinshaw's here.
Gotcha. Thank you. City of Falls Church. Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt is here. Hi, Lynn.
Hello.
Bob Brown, alternate, is here too.
Gotcha. Thank you. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky, present. Happy St. Patty's Day, everybody.
City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rishel, Manassas Park.
Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Thanks.
Dick Anger here.
Gotcha too. Okay, both Virginia Senate and House of Delegate seats are vacant. So moving on to other agencies, WMATA.
Hi, this is Sean.
Sean. Great. Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. National Capital Planning Commission. And National Park Service. All right, that concludes roll call. We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn. And if anybody joins in or didn't have your name called, just make sure you, I see some people like Evan Glass just did it, put it in the chat feature, and that way Lynn will capture that. So thank you, everybody. All right, next up, Lynn, I tried to jump to it too early, but I understand the comments from the public have been submitted. So would you please summarize those for us?
Absolutely, yes. So for the March TPB meeting, the board received 16 comments. So TPB staff have consolidated all of these comments into one document. Our document's been posted on line 1 and is available to the public and all members of the board at the meeting event page today. And Leo just brought it up for you. So today I will be sharing a preview of the main topics that came up in these comments. So the first comment, under Visualize 2045, the region will not achieve its adopted 2030 climate target nor achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. A second series of comments, TPB must ensure that the draft project list to be adopted this spring will reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions enough to reach our 2030 climate goals. The TPB must infuse the Visualize 2045 plan with meaningful measures to significantly reduce greenhouse gases, including measures to reduce vehicle miles traveled. The region needs as much surface freight moving by rail as possible, already almost 4 times more fuel efficient than over-the-road trucking. Electrification of railroad main lines can double this advantage, curtailing greenhouse gas pollution and impacts on climate change. Lastly, the shape the update of Visualize 2045 according to TPB's current greenhouse gas study, the Voices of the Region survey results, and the COG housing goals. So members of the public who submitted comments have been emailed to confirm their comment submission. And the email that we sent also contained a link to today's meeting page and our YouTube broadcast of the meeting. So we invite you to take a look at these. There's 9 pages here. So we did our best to summarize them. So that concludes our comments. And again, they're posted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I think I know there'll be some discussion around this as we move through our agenda as well. So I appreciate the public comments there. All right, next we're going to move to item number 2, which is approval of the February 17, 2021 meeting minutes. I understand there is one correction to the meeting minutes from what had been mailed out. Casey Kostick did participate in last month's meeting, yet somehow her name was not in the list of participants, I believe. So I believe we've corrected that to make sure there. So thank you very much. So with that correction, then I'll now invite a motion to adopt the updated minutes of our February 17th meeting. Whoever wants to make that motion, make sure you say your name and jurisdiction.
Hi, it's Emmett Jordan from Greenbelt. I move that we adopt the minutes as amended.
And
Thank you very
second, this
much.
is Councilmember Denise Mitchell, City of College Park.
Great, thank you very much. So I have the motion and a second. Thank you very much. So let me move that. So remember, I'm going to do jurisdictions. You're only saying nay or absent. So to the District of Columbia first. And now Maryland, Virginia, and now WMATA or any other federal agencies. All right, Conti and Lynn, I heard nothing but affirmative answers. So let that be reflected unanimous in support. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll move to item number 3 on our agenda, the technical committee report. So we have a written summary of our technical committee's March 5th meeting. Technical committee chair Jason Groth will highlight a few topics for us. Let me turn it over to you, Jason.
Thanks very much. All right. Sorry, dealing with one screen today. I'm going to pull up my notes real quick. All right. So first of all, as mentioned, technical committee met on March 5th. 2 items on today's agenda were discussed. That is item 7 today, briefing on the draft FY22 UPWP. Member in the discussion, a member requested a calendar of TPB grant programs to help jurisdictions plan ahead. The various programs like TLC and so on, that calendar has since been provided, which is a great help to the member jurisdictions as they plan ahead to potentially put in applications. On item 8 for today's agenda, a briefing on the draft FY22 Commuter Connections Program. One of the members requested that we have a coordination meeting to discuss the jurisdiction's efforts to get people back into ride sharing and transit. So that was a welcome discussion. Moving on to items that aren't on today's agenda but might be of interest, the following information items were discussed. To highlight, Visualize 2045, the input submissions in the InfoTrack system. Essentially, we were briefed on the status of the project inputs from member jurisdictions, and TPB staff asked that jurisdiction staff attend a special work session on April 21st at 10:30 so that they can help answer questions on the projects as they come up. And this is a special work session that'll be before the April 21st TPB meeting. Moving on to Visualize 2045, the update on the 2021 focus groups. Some interesting discussion on the focus groups. One thing to point out is that essentially it highlights that these focus groups really touch on the human side of transportation. It's an opportunity for the team to engage with the system users. And it was seen as a real step in creating an effective service or system into the future for all its users. And then finally, member jurisdictions would be able to use the resulting data from the decisions, from the data received in this exercise. And then finally, last thing to point out is the launch of the Transit Within Reach program. Essentially, that program is set to start solicitation in May. And it can actually fund up to 30% of design on projects. So it'd be an interesting new tool in the toolbox for each of the member jurisdictions. And with that, that concludes my comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Groth. What we do now is we turn for questions from jurisdictions. So let me run through our jurisdictions if you have any questions for Mr. Groth. First to the district. And next, any questions from Maryland? Any questions from Virginia? And any questions from WMATA or any other agencies? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Groth. I appreciate that. So next we'll turn to item number 4 on the agenda, the Community Advisory Committee report. We have a written report of our Community Advisory Committee's March 11th meeting. Committee Chair Lisa Walton is with us and is going to highlight a few topics for us. Let me turn to you now, Ms. Walton.
Great, thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. As Chair Allen mentioned, the CAC last met on Thursday, March 11th for an online-only meeting. We were briefed on the Voices of the Region survey results and learned about the history of the CAC and its role at the TPB. We also broke into small groups to get to know each other and discuss the year ahead. For Visualize 2045, John Swanson, TPB Transportation Planner, shared the results of the region-wide public opinion survey conducted in fall of 2020. The survey provides input into a range of TPB planning activities, including the 2022 update to Visualize 2045. Karen Armendariz, TPB Public Engagement Specialist, described how survey participants responded to 3 future factors: climate change, autonomous vehicles, and equity. She also described responses to an open-ended question about the transportation investments that could be made today that future generations will be thankful for. This is a similar presentation to the one the board received at the February 2020 meeting, and we had a lot of questions. The committee was curious to know how the results of this public opinion survey will inform the creation of Visualize 2045. There were also questions about survey specifics, including what parts of the region and which demographics received survey responses. The CAC wanted assurances that older adults and people with disabilities participated in the study, and the committee is hopeful that results from Voices of the Region and other public engagement activities can inform long-range plans and policy priorities of the TPB. And this sparked a lot of interest and a lot of questions, as you can imagine. So this is a summary of that. We also had a follow-on to our CAC orientation about the history of the CAC. Brian Hayes, TPB Transportation Planner, shared a brief history of the CAC, including how it began in 1992, when the region was discussing the Woodrow-Wilson Bridge, and how it's changed over the years. He also talked about changes to the committee approved by the TPB in 2020, which are starting to come into effect. And then the committee divided into 3 small groups to discuss what we would like to learn about during our 2-year terms, expectations for each other, and expectations for TPB staff. And I'll briefly highlight some of the results of that discussion because it was very informative and very, very productive. One group highlighted the high cost of housing near transit and wants to know about how creating more affordable housing in the region might impact transportation. They also wanted to discuss ways that transportation in the region can decrease its impact on air quality. Another group wants to encourage the TPB to continue increasing the effort and attention put into making the region's transportation safer, regardless of the mode of transit. Given the uncertainty around emerging transportation technologies, this group also wanted to encourage the region to be more flexible when planning infrastructure. And finally, we had a group that was interested in how the movement of people and services can be more balanced in all directions, basically how we can make sure it's not all about getting into DC and back out again the way maybe more traditionally it was, but having a more balanced approach. The groups also talked about how we can make sure that the voices of all 24 members are heard and how everyone has a role in that by being respectful of time and providing that ability to balance multiple voices. We agreed that breaking into small groups is one good way to achieve this and getting a little bit more engaged with the online meetings. We also talked about the importance of members learning about demographics and aspects of transportation that are unique to this region and to different parts of the region. Finally, we expressed a desire for a balance between depth and breadth when we're discussing transportation issues in the region, so that we are covering a lot, but we're also delving deep into the topics that matter most to CAC members. We also urge staff to be very clear when documenting how public input is incorporated into final products, whether it be some of these great surveys and data that we have or the CAC efforts. And finally, Lynn Erickson, TPB Plan Development and Coordination Program Director, walked the committee through this month's TPB agenda. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walton. How about this? I'm going to mix it up and now we'll ask for questions in reverse order. So are there any questions from WMATA or any other agencies? Are there any questions from Virginia? Any questions from Maryland? And any questions from the district? All right, hearing none, Ms. Walton, thank you very much. We appreciate that. We'll move next to agenda item number 5. This is our steering committee actions and report of the director. We have a written summary of the March 5th steering committee meeting and report from our staff director. Conti, let me turn it over to you, and then we'll do questions likewise after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I will note just a couple of items from the written report that you have in your packet. The steering committee met on March 5th and took 2 actions, which is described on page 2 in the memo. And the supporting documents for those 2 actions are listed in pages 4 through 15. The first action was approving the allocation of some leftover Federal Transportation Alternative Program funds from the District of Columbia to 9 projects that the TPB had previously allocated funds to, but those 9 projects needed some additional funding. So we had some leftover funds and those were allocated, helping those 9 projects move towards completion. The second action that the steering committee took was an amendment to the district's portion of the TPB's Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP. One amendment was to add the H Street Bridge project over the bridge over the railroad project that had been inadvertently left out of the TIP. So we put that back in. And we also took action to add about $38 million in private developer funds for the 11th Street Bridge Park project. Those were the steering committee actions. Couple other items in the memo. An important activity that I would like to highlight is something that TPB Technical Committee Chair Jason just reported. And that is the TPB is we are planning to hold a work session during the April board meeting at 10:30 a.m., just before the board meeting. The work session is about the proposed changes to the projects in the TPB's long-range transportation plan that we know as Visualize 2045, particularly the new projects and any major changes to the projects that are already in the plan. So this is something we're doing for the first time. The work session will be really an opportunity for the board members to have a conversation amongst themselves, but more particularly to provide comments and questions directly to the agencies that have submitted those projects. The agencies will then have time to prepare responses to those comments and questions, in addition to their responses to other comments received from the public. And all of these comments will be summarized and presented to the TPB in May. And in June is when the TPB will be asked to approve the projects to be included in the regional air quality conformity analysis. So we will be sending a detailed email invite for this work session in April. Another activity that I would like to bring to members' attention is TPB is currently seeking and accepting applications from organizations in the region that provide transportation service to older adults and people with disabilities to offset any fiscal impact these organizations may have had due to the pandemic, disruptions due to the pandemic. The applications are due by March 24th, and we plan to bring to the TPB at its April 21st meeting recommendations for allocating the $560,000 that has been made available through the Federal Coronavirus Pandemic Relief Act. Those were just a few points I wanted to highlight, and that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Conti. All right, well, let me turn to jurisdictions for questions. So let me turn to the district first. All right, not hearing any questions. Let me turn to Maryland. All right, and Virginia. All right, and WMATA, any other agencies? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Conti. Next, I'll turn to item number 6, Chairman's remarks. which on our agenda is at 12:45 p.m. We're not even at 12:30, so I want to keep these short, see if we can kind of keep things rolling. I think it's important to note, though, of course, that our meeting this month, like a lot of things as we are looking back over the last year, marks the first time that we moved into virtual meetings, not just for the board, but all of our committees, our subcommittees, a lot of our staff work, of course, a lot of us in our own capacities. And so that's certainly not a distinction that we sought or something that we are necessarily celebrating, but it is something that's important to mark that we have moved into this. We certainly keep in the front of our minds, as well as in our actions, the impact that this pandemic has had on people's health, jobs, our families, vulnerable residents, and all the communities that we serve. So it's not an anniversary that we celebrate, but it's an important milestone that we mark. And I want to thank TPB for this and their staff for being able to pivot and work in this way to make sure that the important work of TPB continues. Even though we'd all love to be together in the same room having lunch together, we've been able to really keep things moving and keep the work of TPB going. And I think Kelly did an outstanding job last year getting us through the first half of this, and I look to continue this in 2021. And again, my hope is certainly that at some point we will be back in person together. But I just wanted to note that I think it's important. We certainly, and we've talked about this, we have a lot of work ahead as we now consider, each of us in our own jurisdictions, each of us in our different agencies, budgets, laws, policies, actions that are really going to help us recover from this pandemic. I know we say a little bit too often, maybe the light is at the end of the tunnel, but there's a lot of opportunity right now in the next few months where we can act with intentionality around making sure that part of our recovery is focused on equity. Part of our recovery is focused on not a return to what normal was, but a belief of what normal should be. And I think that's really what we have in front of us. And I know that each of us are all working toward that goal. And I'm really proud to work with each of you as we continue this hard work, both independently in our jurisdictions, but also regionally on behalf of everybody moving us all forward. So I really appreciate that and just want to make sure we noted that as we mark this 1 year time frame. With that, we're going to move straight into our action items. Our first action item is an amendment to the FY 2021 UPWP and the FY 2021 carryover funding to FY 2022. And I'm going to note Lynn. After Lynn makes her presentation, we're going to have a discussion and she's going to essentially lead us off with adopting a work program and budget for our next fiscal year starting July 1st, 2021. And then let me just turn to you, Lynn, at this point. I believe both action items 7 and 8 are linked. So if you can help make sure you tee that up for everybody so we understand that as we jump into discussion afterwards.
Absolutely. And in the spirit of keeping things quick, this should really only be about 3 minutes as this is your third UPWP presentation.
You've completely jinxed it now, Lynn. It's going to take 3 minutes.
I said my presentation is 3 minutes. Next slide, please. So I'm looking to update you guys on two main things. One, I'll talk about the TPB actions before you, and I'll also talk about the changes since last month. So next slide, please. So as you recall, hopefully, I spoke about how our revenue comes together from 3 buckets of funding. So I'm happy to report that we are solid on all 3 of those as of now. We know what our new federal fiscal year funding is. We've confirmed our unexpended funding. And the carryover funding from last month we presented to you, I'm going to update you with one small change. So the carryover is basically the projects and funding that we don't think we'll be able to complete by the end of this current fiscal year, and we take actions to roll it over to the next fiscal year. So there's about $14,000 in Virginia technical assistance funding for bike and ped counts that we're going to move to fiscal 2022. So that means we are asking for a total of $2.7 million of carryover funding, and put that all together, and our total fiscal 2022 UPWP comes in at about $18,035,794. We didn't receive any public comments, really on our proposed plan and our carryover. However, if you recall last month, Mr. Snyder made a comment. So Leo, if you could pull up so what I'm having Leo do is pull up page 21 of the document in the new document that's posted, which is also page 27 on your PDF of the materials. And he asked us to look into maybe crosswalking our deliverables with the TPB policy focus areas. So we went ahead and developed this table. It's just a short 2-page table, so we invite you all to look at it. That's really the only other change we made to the document other than correcting and updating the funding. So Leo, if you could go back to the presentation, please. And the next slide. So after we approve today, we're going to submit our 2022 UPWP to the US DOT for approval. They usually take about 60 days. Meanwhile, our federal partners, our state partners, DDOT, MDOT, and VDOT, VDRPT, will all give us our funding authorization to start spending down that funding, which should start on July 1st. Next slide, please. So today we're asking the board to take 3 actions. The first, which is Resolution R15-2021. This action is to amend the current UPWP. What that means is that we're going to take out that carryover funding, the projects and tasks that I had talked about before. The second resolution is to R14-2021 is to actually carry that funding over from the old 2021 to the new 2022. And then the third resolution, R15-2021, that's actually to approve the whole package, the new FY 2022 UPWP. So that concludes my presentation, Mr. Allen. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Lynn. We'll turn to questions and discussion. Before we then, what I'll do is I'll ask for a motion after that. So one question I had, Lynn, is related to, I guess, some of the public comments that we heard. Is we're looking at our work plan, and it's, I guess, to some degree, maybe it's more of a function of calendaring and scheduling. Maybe others know the technical aspects better than me. But the work plan in phase 2 has a greenhouse gas emissions study. I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, that study won't be done until December. So does that mean that the report or the outcomes of that study would be precluded from being able to be in this year's CLRP and Visualize 2045? Can you walk me through the timing of how that work plan works with the other workflow?
Sure, I'll turn to Conti on that specific question. What you're asking about is a project that we have in our whole budget, in our task list of things to do. And the way we create our document and the way we track and report on our Unified Planning Work Program is from a sort of a project level, like what it takes to do the projects. And within those projects is kind of the specifics you're talking about. We don't typically identify or preclude anything that relates to those projects as those projects are moving along. So your question is probably more specific to the work that's actually already underway under the current fiscal 2021 UPWP. So I will turn to Conti to finish answering that part of the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Chair. Yes, to answer your question, the climate change mitigation study that the board asked us to undertake has already begun in this fiscal year. That work will continue with the funding that's already been repurposed from the existing budget and continue on. But in fiscal year 2022, which begins July 1, additional funding will continue to be made available so that the entire study will be done in December. So that is one part of the answer. How does this study and the findings of this study be incorporated into the TPB's long-range transportation plan? The TPB's long-range transportation plan will not be adopted till June of next year. So the results of the climate change mitigation study will be available in December. The results of the study, the board asked us to come back with what are the specific levels of outcomes that need to be attained or achieved within the transportation sector to help reduce greenhouse gases within the transportation sector, according to the goals that have been set. Those levels of outcomes would be by how much should the VMT go down, how many or what percentage of our vehicle fleet, whether it's passenger cars, heavy duty trucks, transit buses, school buses, what portion of them should be converted to electric vehicles to reduce that. And finally, what is the level of operational efficiencies on our roadways that needs to be achieved to help reduce greenhouse gases? All of those 3 findings that comes out of the study in December, the TPB will have up to 5 months to discuss that and to integrate any and all of those into the new long-range plan as an integral part of it. So that is up until now, over the past 11 years, the TPB has been engaged in at least 4 different studies. They have all been separate from the long-range plan as a document. This is the first time where the TPB will actually be incorporating into the plan specific outcomes, levels of outcomes that we need to achieve. How much of that will be achieved in 2022 remains to be seen, but it will set the basis for the TPB saying with every amendment, with every update to the long-range plan, we will keep monitoring how are we making progress towards those levels of outcomes. So that is how the study will inform the long-range plan update.
Okay. I guess one quick follow-up, then I'll turn to others if they have questions. So does that mean that, because don't we have a filing deadline in October? So does that mean that the project, the study that comes out in December, will TPB essentially evaluate projects, even if they've already been submitted previously, with that standard or with that study as part of the evaluation?
Yeah, the project updates that are being submitted right now, which the TPB will in a work session review in April, and the TPB will be asked to approve, including them in an analysis in June. None of that, none of those projects can individually be a greenhouse gas be reduced by this one project. By how much will the VMT be reduced by this one project? By how much will our operational efficiency improve by this one project? That project level specific evaluation and assessment cannot be done. The TPB staff do not have the resources or the tools to do that at the project level. That said, the approved projects in June will be taken into a regional level air quality conformity analysis, which will also extract greenhouse gas emissions from all of those projects together. Those results will be made available to the public and to the TPB in March of next year, which will show how much progress this combined multimodal set of projects that are in the plan, along with the land use assumptions we make, how much will all of that reduce greenhouse gases? So it will provide a sense or an estimate of how much of our goals will be achieved through this combination of projects and land use.
Okay. Let me turn and see if there are any other questions. So I guess we'll do this the way we have done jurisdiction-wise. So let me go in my reverse order now this time. And so let me turn to WMATA, any other agencies.
Thank you, Chairman. I am trying to process the back and forth that just took place between yourself and Conti. I believe, Mr. Chairman, the way I'm interpreting this is that this body will be there's a risk that this body will inherit a list of projects which are not geared towards a climate change target or goal, and then be in a position to move that through the sort of process churn, and then receive information that tells us what that climate change goal and VMT goal should be, and then we would be rapidly moving forward to adopt those previously untargeted projects and submit them to the Biden administration, even though our own documentation will tell them that they don't meet our goals. I think I heard that, but let's see where the rest of the meeting goes. It seems odd.
Shyam, I'm happy to respond to that. I think it would be probably overlooking some of the realities or the findings of the current plan and all of our previous plans to say that this will be a set of projects that achieves no greenhouse gas reductions. the plan that the TPB adopted in 2018 reduces greenhouse gas reductions by 23% below 2005 levels between now and 2045, while accommodating a 30% increase in employment in our region, while adding another 1.3 million more people into this region, right? So there is growth happening, and there is greenhouse gas reductions also being attained by the combination of projects. Much of those reductions, even though they fall short of the 50% that the region has set, we have to reduce greenhouse gases by 2030, it is moving towards that direction. If you look at the 2014 long-range plan, it did not achieve 23% reduction. So with every iteration of the plan, we are attaining more reductions. Is there more that the region should be doing in terms of the project combinations? I think the board is on record saying absolutely. The TPB said that in 2010 when it did the what would it take analysis. If you look at this long-range plan that the TPB adopted in 2010 and compare that to the long-range plan that the TPB adopted in 2018, on a number of metrics, there is movement. The growth in VMT from the long-range plan in the 2018 is lower than the growth in VMT that the TPB's 2010 long-range plan had. The number of walk and bike trips the 2018 long-range plan provides is much, much higher than what we saw in 2010. The telecommuting and even the total number of transit trips in 2018 is higher than 2010. There are a number of goals that the TPB has set. The TPB has said equity is very important. Will this plan completely achieve equity in this region in one plan update? No, we are moving towards that. We have said safety. The current level of safety is unacceptable. We need to improve it. Will this plan completely achieve safety? Will it achieve Vision Zero? No, we are moving towards that. So I think this study, the climate change mitigation study, in my opinion, is going to be very critical because it is going to now tell us, not just at a strategy level like the safety and study did, this is going to tell us what are the specific levels of outcomes we need to achieve. And we can work towards that. Can we do it all in one plan update? Based on the studies that we have done over the past 10 years, those findings tell us it is going to be extremely challenging to move this on the dime in one plan update.
Thanks. I don't want to jump back in, but I guess I almost feel like I'm hearing that two things are true at the same time, in that the projects, which is not a bad thing, but I'm trying to make sure I understand this, that it is true that the projects that would be moved forward by October would represent a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and that the results that would be coming in December from the study would come after that submission. So we would not be evaluating those projects that are being moved forward with that study, but then would be using that to then evaluate updates to those projects the subsequent years.
Exactly. For example, Mr. Allen, we can expect the results of the study that will come out in December to say by how much should our VMT change, right? And there are many actions we can take to reduce VMT. There's no single action, many actions. So, but a result of many actions will manifest itself in reduced VMT growth into the future. And this study in December will tell us by how much. The conformity analysis results that you will have in March will tell us how much will the long-range plan reduce the VMT by. So we can identify what is the gap. Based on all the past long-range plans we have done, it is going to be very clear that our long-range plan that exists today, nor the changes that have been proposed, will get us. It will not give us a greenhouse gas emissions of 50% below 2005 level.
Okay. Let me, just in the interest of time, I know I want to move on to other questions. I guess it feels like a question that might be in front of us is those pieces may come in, but they would be subsequent years follow-up in terms of when they would be evaluated and be implemented. And is there a path, is there a road that allows us to be able to move more quickly or to hold to have the project be evaluated there? I need to stop talking though, so I let other people have a chance to ask questions. So let me turn to Virginia next. I see Dave Snyder.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for a very good discussion, because I think we're getting at sort of a fundamental issue, a disconnect between large policy sort of pronouncements and decisions and the actual capability of the projects to meet those. And so I'm suggesting that maybe this might be an agenda item for the next meeting. That is, how can we better align the policy objectives with the grassroots development of individual projects? And I also recognize that we have a very diverse region, diverse in every way, diverse from a population standpoint, diverse from a geographic standpoint. And in no way do I want to make it difficult for any part of our region to prosper. But I think this discussion shows a fundamental issue where I'd like to see us move beyond a discussion of what the problems may be. And I am impressed with the fact that we're making progress. Let's be positive. We are making some progress on these things, these policies that we've set forth, including environmental policies and hopefully equity policies as well. But I think our process needs to be looked at to make sure that we have a smooth flow of the policy determination and the actual generation of the particular project. So I hope this will continue, and so we'll look at areas where we can improve things. But again, I want to go into this with a very clear understanding that this is not to benefit one part of our region over the other, and that we fully understand the needs may be different, but we need to find a better way to better align our policies and the individual project development at the very beginning and early stages of these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any other questions or comments from Virginia?
Yes, Jeanette Rischel, Manassas Park. I wanted to thank Mr. Snyder for his comments. I truly believe he's sincere when he says that he does not want to disadvantage any locality. I will say that the issues of the inner ring localities are different from the issues and the needs of the outer ring localities. And I just wanted to emphasize that we should hopefully keep that in mind when we have this future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from Virginia?
Kristen Umstadt.
Yes.
I would just like to echo what my friend Mayor Rochelle said, and I also appreciate Mr. Snyder's recognition of the differences. We are very different out in the outer ring, and we don't have the density easily served by sometimes bus or metro. So I appreciate your sensitivity to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else from Virginia? We'll go to Maryland. All right, we'll go to Maryland.
Yeah, this is Earl Lewis from Maryland. I do appreciate all the comments that have been made by our friends in Virginia. The transportation network is a complex system, and that system needs to meet the needs of a lot of various parties, but at the same time, we need to meet our environmental goals as well. And I think that's a challenge that obviously we're all up to, and know that we have to take into account the needs of the core, the middle, and the outer in building that network, as well as the multimodal basis of it. That includes transit, roads, airports, ports, etc. So thank you all for all working together. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I saw Ms. Costick raise her hand.
All right, double mute takes a little bit. Thank you all for the great discussion on this. I just want to build on some of the discussion previously about the climate and GHG emissions study, which I think is really, really important and will help move us in the right direction long term. My concern is that we might not be doing enough in the short run, and I know it takes time to achieve these things, and I think we're on a good path. But I also see us in a climate crisis, and we have pretty significant transportation emissions. We have a growing population in the region, so I understand that VMT may be being reduced to an extent per capita, but we also have a lot more people coming into the region. So I think we really need to make sure that we have an opportunity with this long-range transportation plan to be bold and to be a little bit bolder than we might be considering otherwise. I think we already know that we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and I personally struggle with, as we go through this, what we were talking about before. We can't assess by a specific project, so we have to look at the entire set of projects. But then we're also tasked with voting on a set of projects and approving those projects for this long-range plan. So it often feels confusing, I think, in terms of how we approach this, to be both talking about specific projects and the larger scale. And those individual projects do impact the larger scale. And I think we do really need to, as Chair Ellen said earlier, we're looking at recovery from COVID and a new opportunity to kind of rebuild the systems in a better way. And so I would really like to see us do more on climate change and really have some bold initiatives and look for ways where we can really quantify and measure some of our aspirational initiatives and some of the priorities that we set for the region. And I'd also would love, as we're going through this, if there's an opportunity for us either prior to approving projects that go into the air quality analysis, and or after that, for us to get some sense maybe from COG staff in terms of the COG climate plan and how this fits with that plan. Because it is very hard for us to assess. And I think oftentimes we get into, this project is going to mitigate congestion and thus it will improve air quality and emissions, but maybe long term, it won't actually achieve the goals that we are trying to achieve. And that's one of the concerns that I have as we look at this moving forward. So I hope we can get some more of that information, really have some more quantifiable things that we as a board can consider, not, as myself not being someone who is a transportation planner, to be able to have those materials to look at.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Costick. I see Patrick Rohan had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to echo a lot of the comments that have already been stated about the one thing I'd love to hear from staff more is and maybe put some recommendations together about how we can be more flexible as a region. I understand that the requirements for federal approval and federal review of our transportation, both the TIP and the long range plan, require us to develop these things over time and many years in advance. But we really do need to be aggressive about how we are approaching climate to meet our region's goals. And also, I think as Councilmember Kostiuk said, to tie it into the overall regional plans for climate change and greenhouse gas emission reduction. So I'd love to hear staff's thoughts and maybe fleshed out a little better about how we can achieve that. And maybe that'll be part of this report coming up this year. But I think it's critical that we be aggressive and that that our goals, our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, really shape the projects that we're pursuing in the region.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else from Maryland? All right, I've already spoken from the district, so let me just turn to anyone else from the district I should ask. All right, thank you. I appreciate the discussion. Lynn, probably weren't expecting that on the presentation, but I think it speaks to the urgency here, and then how these different pieces play in. And so I think that that's been a helpful discussion for us to look at, and perhaps we can follow up to try to think through what some next steps to follow up on this conversation could be here. Because I think there's I hear regionally members talking about trying to find the right balance, but I also hear members regionally talking about continuing to act with urgency in a way that then helps us evaluate each of our projects. And I know there's tons of process here, but I think we're trying to figure out how to make sure we use that process in a way that keeps it moving forward as quickly as possible, not just moving forward, but moving forward faster. And that's an important part of what we're doing. So I appreciate that. So I guess with that, then I need to actually formally ask for a motion to adopt Resolution R13 2021 to amend our FY21 budget and work program. Do I hear a motion? I'll do it. I can. I'll move it. Is there a second?
Pam Sabeski.
All right. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate it.
Like.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Then let me first go jurisdictionally for any nays or abstentions from the district. From Maryland. From Virginia.
Sorry, I couldn't get the mute quick enough.
That's okay.
It's Bridget in Rockville. I will abstain.
Okay. Thank you. Let me turn to Virginia. And WMATA, any agencies? All right, thank you all very much. So Conti and Lynn, my notes are that it's approved with one abstention from Ms. Newton.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right, then next, Lynn, do I need to make the motion for Resolution R14 2021? Okay, you're not here. Then I will move to adopt Resolution R14 2021 to carry over work activities and funding from fiscal year to next fiscal year. Do I have a second?
Kelly Russell will second from Frederick.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russell. All right. And then I think we've already had the discussion on this, just to make sure I haven't skipped over anybody. Were there any questions anyone had about this resolution 14-2021 separately from our previous conversation? All right, and hearing none then, again, asking for nays and abstentions from the district. From Maryland. From Virginia. And WMATA and other agencies. All right, Conti and Lynn, on this one I hear unanimous in support.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, excellent. Okay, then with that, next we'll turn to item number 8 on our agenda, the FY 2022 Unified Planning Work Program. Am I turning to you, Lynn, on that? No, I'm not. What am I doing here?
Just asking for a motion in a second.
Got it.
This is to approve. This one is to approve the 2022 UPWP so we can start work. So it kind of wraps everything up.
Got it. All right. So 3 total resolutions. All right. Well, then let me move to adopt Resolution R15 2021. Is there a second?
Earl Lewis seconds.
I didn't actually catch who that was. Was that Earl?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. All right. Any questions on this specific resolution? All right. Then I shall call nays and abstentions from the district. From Maryland. From Virginia. And from WMATA and any other agencies. Hearing none, Conti and Lynn, this passes unanimously.
Great, thanks. I do want to say that one of the main reasons we set aside a work session on April 21st at 10:30 was to provide an opportunity for discussion. Hint, hint. So please put that on your calendars. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well-timed reminder there, Lynn. Thank you very much. All right, and look at that. We are right back on schedule again. So item number 9, our FY 2022 Commuter Connections Work Program is scheduled to start at 1 o'clock, and it's right at 1 o'clock. So perfect timing. Next up in our regional travel demand management program, Commuter Connections, Last month, Nick reviewed the draft work program and budget for fiscal year 2022. And Nick, why don't I turn it over to you?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before you today is the draft FY 2022 Commuter Connections Work Program. It was reviewed with the board last month. We did not receive any comments, so the document remained the same. And so we're going to be looking for the board to adopt Resolution 16-2021 for that work program. But I also wanted to mention that, and we talked a little bit about this during the last board meeting, that we're working on looking to educate the public about the benefits of using public transit and all alternative modes as the recovery kicks into gear for the region. And we felt that it was important that that work began this fiscal year. So we're working with our state funding agencies to develop some messaging, as well as our network members, and a campaign to welcome back commuters to transit and other commute modes such as van pools and carpools, as well as commuter rail and the metro. And that campaign is going to focus on local bus ridership, which was hit somewhat hard during the pandemic, to help restore ridership levels and to ensure that traffic congestion on the roads doesn't increase. And then we're also going to give some attention to the transit dependent communities that were also hit hardest during the pandemic with reduced transit availability, and really reaching out to this community to let them know that transit is again available. And we also want to give some attention to the commuter bus systems to help get their ridership back up, since they also run along many of the congested corridors in our region. And then we're also going to be looking to target carpool and vanpool groups through that campaign. So really the whole goal is to place commuter connections in a positive position to help the region's recovery efforts. And I know this is a priority for the TPB, and we're looking forward to putting this campaign together. And we may start out with some small messaging, maybe later this fiscal year in May, June timeframe, but we're really going to probably move forward in a pretty robust fashion, probably sometime over the summer when the timing is right, to basically get this campaign out into the public realm. So I just wanted to mention that before you moved ahead on adopting the resolution or discussing or asking me any questions about the work program. And I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yep, absolutely. So before I make a motion to adopt the resolution, let me turn for any questions. Let me turn in reverse order from last time. So let me turn to WMATA and any other agencies. Let me turn to Virginia, Maryland, and the district. All right, hearing no questions, I'll make a motion now to adopt Resolution R15-2021 to adopt our work program and budget for fiscal year 2022. Do I have a second?
Tabasky, Manassas City.
Thank you, Ms. Sebastian. All right, then I'll vote. And again, this is going to be for nays and abstentions from the district. From Maryland. From Virginia. And from WMATA and agency. All right. Lynn, we'll reflect that as unanimous vote in support. Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to move to item number 10 on our agenda, priority airport ground access projects. We're now moving into our information items. Last month, deep apologies, Ariana. We had to bump the presentation because we ran out of time. So Ariana, you were here. Let me turn it over to you, and please tell us all about these priority projects that are going to help improve access to and from our airports.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chairman Allen. And good morning, everyone, or rather good afternoon. My name is Ariana Kadunas. I'm a transportation planner here at COG TPB. And today you'll be briefed on the priority projects included in Visualize 2045 that support airport ground access. Please note that As Visualize 2045 is updated, these updates will be reflected in future iterations of the project lists contained in this presentation and the accompanying report, the Comprehensive Regional Air System Plan, otherwise known as the RASP. These projects were recommended by the Aviation Technical Subcommittee as part of TPB's Continuous Airport Systems Planning Program and are important because of their potential to improve access to the region's 3 major commercial airports, which are Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport, otherwise known as BWI, Washington Dulles International Airport, IAD, and Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, DCA. Next slide, please. The Washington-Baltimore Air System Planning Region consists of 25 jurisdictions. That's 161 aviation analysis zones, known as AAZs, and 2,604 transportation analysis zones, TAZs. Next slide. The goal of the CAS program is to provide a process that supports the planning, development, and operation of airport facilities and the transportation facilities that serve the airports in a systematic framework for the Washington-Baltimore region. The airport system planning process consists of a continuous cycle that begins with a regional air passenger survey. This survey is followed by forecasts of future air passenger travel and the ground travel of these air passengers to and from the region's 3 commercial airports. These forecasts in turn lead to the development of a revised ground access plan for the region. The CAS program is developed, implemented, and monitored with the assistance of the Aviation Technical Subcommittee of the TPB's Technical Committee. It is funded by the Federal Aviation Administration, the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and the Maryland Aviation Administration. The subcommittee is responsible for the coordination of airport system planning within the regional transportation planning process, and the region's 3 major commercial airports are represented on the TPB by MAA and MWA. Next slide. In 2020, transportation planning staff at COG, in coordination with the FAA, MWA, and MAA, completed the multi-year 3-phase regional air system plan, otherwise known as the RASP. The 2020 Rasp Report is the first comprehensive RASP conducted since the CAS program's inaugural study, The Future of Washington's Airports, in 1975, and it is now published. We'll be dropping the report link in the chat for your convenience, although please do note that a few adjustments will be getting made to the report. Next. Given how critically important the region's 3 major commercial airports are to the economic vitality of the Washington-Baltimore region, it is recommended that the projects, programs, and policies identified in the following slides be given priority consideration for implementation. Within the Rasp Report, the ground access element section identified airport ground access supporting projects proposed in the regional long-range transportation plans of both TPB and the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board. Based on a review of these projects and in consideration of anticipated airport demand documented in this RASP, the following projects are deemed critical to accommodate current and growing airport ground access demand and thus should be prioritized. Next. Highlighted here are the elements of Visualize 2045's aspirational initiatives and regional transportation priorities plan that most directly relate to the Washington-Baltimore regional air system. Next. While BRTB's Maximize 2045 projects were also
please.
Excuse me? Okay. While BRTB's Maximize 2045 projects were also reviewed and incorporated into the RASP report, for the purposes of this presentation, I am only discussing Visualize 2045 priority projects. Following careful review of all capital projects identified in Visualize 2045, airport planning staff at MWA representing National and Dulles airports and staff at MAA representing BWI Airport recommended a total of 33 highway projects and 1 transit project. And those are listed here and on the next slide. And we can now go to the next slide. And it's also worth, as I mentioned already, Maximize 2045 projects were also reviewed and incorporated, but those are not included here. And this slide contains the 1 priority transit project and the VDOT interstate roadway priority projects. Next slide. TPB staff will continue to follow the CAS planning cycle and work to achieve optimal alignment with each airport's planning processes when determining the next RASP update. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time and attention this afternoon. I'm happy to take questions as time permits. Otherwise, please feel free to reach me at the contact information listed here. And this concludes my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's see. Should we first turn to questions? So let me see if there's any questions from the district. All right. Any questions from Maryland?
Go ahead. This is Emmett Jordan out in Greenbelt. I have a comment just in regard to the 1 transit access priority, particularly in light of the priority of a comprehensive range of transportation options. And looking at slide number 8, just a quick comment. The connection from BWI to Prince George's County, right now, there is really only 1 mass transit connection, that being the Penn line that stops in New Carrollton, and it may stop in the Seabrook station as well, or Bowie. But I think that we need to make sure that there is actually a range of options. And I guess about 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, the B30 bus line was discontinued by WMATA. And that was the only other link from BWI to Prince George's County. Particularly, it's a vital link to College Park at the University of Maryland, which is the largest employer in Prince George's County. So I'm hopeful, I want to make this comment, that either WMATA reinstates some version of the line or that MDOT will actually pick that up. So I just don't, I worry about there only being 1 connection through the Mark Penn line between Prince George's County and BWI Airport.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
I have a comment, Gary Ehrenrich, Montgomery County, and we had some discussion.
Gary, sorry to interrupt you. I saw a couple of hands go up at one time, so I'm just going to do a quick lineup of order so I can get people queued up. So Gary, I'll turn to you. Then I saw Ms. Kostick, then I saw Ms. Taveras. I don't know if there were any others, but we'll go in that order. I think that's the order.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm sorry I interrupted. Some of the Maryland discussions earlier this week, we were surprised that the purple line was not included as a priority project. Certainly a major connection to the Metro Rail system, which does take you right now to National, and in the future will take you to Dulles, and does take you to New Carrollton with the connection that you have to the Penn line. So we would suggest very strongly that be included as a priority project, and not just one mentioned in the document as important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gary. And I do just want to quickly respond to that and say that I did receive comments from Carrie earlier this week, and I did, in response to that, I spoke with our airport planning partners who did indicate from the MAA and BWI perspective that when the environmental impact statement was conducted for the purple line, BWI was not listed anywhere in the area of impact in terms of connectivity to the airport. So our partners at MAA indicated that while from their perspective it should be included in the project, it would not be considered a priority from their perspective in terms of connectivity. And I received similar comments from MWA, but I'm happy to have that conversation offline, you know, and just see what more your perspectives are regarding that. But I know we have several other questions teed up, but I just wanted to, you know, acknowledge my response to that.
Thank you. Let me turn to Ms. Kostick, then Ms. Taveras right after that.
Thank you. I want to echo Mr. Ehrenroach's suggestion to include the purple line. My concern when looking at the list here is that it's very heavily highway focused rather than transit focused, and I think the impacts of doing some of the projects maybe go beyond just accessing the airports. And I wondered how much this is really just looking at kind of prioritizing the airport access issue versus whether it also gets into any consideration of other priorities such as climate change or equity or other considerations, or if this is really just a recommendation focused purely on the airport access point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. I appreciate that. The spirit of this study is really exclusively looking at the airports. I agree with you fundamentally that we need to be looking from an equity lens, from a climate lens. This was exclusively with our subcommittee and our airport planning partners asking what improves access to the airports with the existing conditions of the projects that are included in Visualize 2045 to choose from. So also as updates are made to Visualize 2045, we will also be updating this Rasp document as well.
Thank you. I'd love to see as much as possible more of the transit focus in there.
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, this is Earl Lewis. I second all the other comments because the purple line does help connectivity via transit with this connection at New Carrollton and across the Maryland part of the outer regions, towards the Montgomery County, and that's going to be helpful getting people to the airport. And then obviously that purple line has connections along its route to lots of other transit lines, which will all help people via transit to BWI.
Thank you. Let me turn to Councilmember Taveras.
Hi, I really had almost the same comments. I mean, right now, the way I see it as somebody who lives along the Purple Line corridor, basically I was concerned in my conversation with administration with Vic Weinsberg, we were concerned about that, as well as it's just the fact that these lines open up new opportunities, not just for access to BWI, but also to DCA, and as well with the Silver Line reaching Dulles. So we want to be able to make sure that we are talking about the increased interconnectivity through these three different mechanisms. So hopefully that's reflected, even though you're saying that might not be a possibility, or that there were some increased concerns. I wasn't really following why they felt that it couldn't be incorporated at this time.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And our subcommittee will be meeting next Thursday, so I'm taking notes of all of your comments, and I will make sure that these are shared back with our airport partners. And yeah, I don't want to speak too much for BWI and their perspective, but just from what I was told, it was really referencing back to the environmental impact statement that was done for the Purple Line and the documentation of how it was considered at that time that the Purple Line would impact connectivity to BWI Airport. But that doesn't mean, you know, that all of your perspectives are very valid on this, and it will certainly be increasing the opportunity for many people to be getting there. So I'll make sure all these comments are brought back to the subcommittee.
Thank you very much, Ariana. Let me turn to Virginia if I can now. I see Dave Snyder.
Sure. Thanks a lot. So in minutes, this is the kind of issue that we discussed generically a few minutes ago. The report, it seems to me, suggests that the number one objective is reducing congestion, which is understandable as an objective, particularly if you're stuck in traffic or it's difficult to get to the airports. We all recognize the critical role that the airports play in our regional economy. But what's lacking, it seems to me, are these additional lenses that we talked about. Is there a better way to address congestion other than creating new lanes of highway? That may be the preferred way, particularly if you move forward with electrification of the vehicle fleet, et cetera. But this report, it seems to me, is not well aligned with where we're, I think, collectively trying to go. Again, recognizing we want to support the airports. They're terribly important. We want to make it even more convenient for people. So it seems to me there almost needs to be a revision of this report in connection with the broader thinking about the best way to achieve a multiple set of objectives. So that would be my comment, which I think is a more generic comment based upon what you've heard from Marilyn more specifically with regard to the purple line. Are these set of projects really the best way to reduce congestion, improve air quality, and make the airports more accessible for everyone, and including our business travelers, our tourists, as well as those who live here and are practicing and are going to the airport first? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we could hear Ariana there, but I think she said she's been taking notes on all these comments to bring back as well. Any other comments or questions from Virginia? All right, and then from the district. All right, Ariana, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking notes on all the comments and questions as well.
Absolutely, thank you.
I'm sorry, Sean. I see Sean's hand.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I have one question which emerged after the Purple Line dialogue. Thank you for that, colleagues. Ariana, nice to see you. I'm curious about whether or not some of the, we have a rather provocative proposal at the regional level that's being considered, which is the Maryland Maglev project, which I believe is supposed to have a connection to BWI. Is it the position of this study that that aforementioned project does not actually have an accessibility impact to BWI and therefore is not included? Or was it a decision made up front to not include it in the analysis?
There was a decision made up front because at the time we were conducting the study, the EIS had not been completed yet. So at that time, it wasn't considered a project that was in the pipeline.
I guess that raises an interesting structural question for this body. These projects that are effectively out of the bounds of our purview, those that don't receive federal funding or we don't evaluate them formally, at some point in time, if these are massive multi-billion-dollar projects that are being sold to the region as mobility impacts, shouldn't we be considering them in our evaluations?
And Mr. Chairman, I can respond to that. Any project that is studied by either a member agency or a non-member agency, any transportation, surface transportation project that is being studied eventually has to come back to the TPB for formal inclusion in its plan and in its air quality conformity analysis if it meets one of two conditions. One, if it is using any federal funding at all, even a penny, then it has to come to us for review, consideration, approval. Even if it is not using any federal funding at all, even if it is totally privately funded, if it affects the transportation system's capacity, the entire system's capacity, it has to come to the TPB. So just this morning, I read that the public comment period for the Maglev has been extended now. So it is still in the public comment period. So we will see where it goes. And right now, it is my understanding that that is a study that is being conducted by a private entity, even though Maryland DOT has been asked to be the sponsor because it's a Federal Railway Administration's project. So if that project does proceed and conclude through its environmental process with a locally preferred alternative and a final alternative, I'm sure it will come back to us. Now, once a locally preferred alternative has been identified, we would be happy to invite them to brief us on what it is, how does this comport with all the other policies that the TPB has talked about, something that we talked about earlier. We invited a similar presentation for the Long Bridge when that draft EIS ended up with a locally preferred alternative. We'll be happy to follow up.
Okay. I want to try to move us on because we have another pretty meaty item coming right after this. I will say I take your point, Sean, though, because one of kind of two quick comments on a Maglev. Anyone who thinks that this is going to be a completely privately funded project and there won't be subsidies at some point being asked for, be it from county, state, or federal, I got something else I can try to sell you. And the other piece is, at some point there will be, I think process-wise, whether it's this project or something else, if you wait until a project is kind of already gone through multiple levels of approval and then it finally gets to us, then we're not actually thinking about it on the front end. We're just kind of reacting and we find ourselves pinned in new places. So I appreciate, Sean, you're raising that point and having that be a part of the thought in the conversation. With that, I want to move on though, because I want to make sure we don't run out of time and keep us moving, because we do have another very substantial item coming up here, which is item number 11, our regional travel survey, change and observed trips since 2007-2008. So this is the third consecutive month that we're going to get to geek out on some data, which is awesome. Given our interest in exploring the many stories data tells us, staff has scheduled a bit more time for this since we kind of ran long on a couple of our other presentations. So hopefully we are able to have our discussion here. I'm going to try my best to keep us moving throughout so that we don't run and have to bump more items again. So Dr. Joe is going to brief us on how the travel in this region has changed since 2017 to 2018 relative to 2007-2008. I will say, and I think Dr. Joe will reference this, on one hand, I could look at that and say, well, wait a minute, hasn't the world completely turned upside down in the last year? So what does this actually tell us? And I think as we will find out, it is still have an incredible value to take a look at what took place in that decade, and then it helps inform us as we are working ahead. So let me turn it over to you, Dr. Joe.
Thank you very much, Chair Allen, and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to speak to the board today. I'll be giving a presentation on the 2017-2018 Regional Travel Survey, focusing on change in observed trips since 2007-2008. Next slide. So I realize it has been a while since I have briefed the board. So just to provide some context, the Regional Travel Survey is a once-a-decade household travel survey that is conducted by the TPB. And this survey collects detailed information about households and their daily travel obtained from a travel diary. So unlike other transportation surveys, which may focus on a single mode or just solely on commute trips, the RTS includes all types of trips and travel modes that are taken in the region, similar to a transportation census. So the information captured from this survey provides a comprehensive snapshot of regional travel patterns and how these travel patterns have changed over time. The Regional Travel Survey was conducted in two parts. The first part was a recruitment survey, which collected information on household, person, and vehicle characteristics. The second part was the one-day travel diary, in which household members reported actual trips taken on their assigned travel day. So my briefing to the TPB last October shared the initial findings on observed trips from the travel diary. And this presentation will take a deeper dive into the travel diary. Next slide, please. In my last briefing, I provided a snapshot of observed travel in the TPB planning region, comparing differences by sub-area, activity centers, and equity emphasis areas. I focused on differences in household and person trip rates by demographic characteristics, in addition to differences in commute and non-commute trip share. In today's briefing, I'll examine how observed travel has changed in the TPB region from 2007-2008 to 2017-2018 for household and person trips. Next slide. The information that I'm about to share focuses on change in reported travel for daily weekday trips, mode share for all trips, and commute trips. I will also share additional findings from the 2017-2018 survey, focusing on trip length by mode and purpose. Next slide. Similar to previous RTS briefings, our comparison of demographic and travel behavior factors will focus on differences between our sub-regional areas, the core, the inner suburb, and the outer suburb. This chart shows the jurisdictions for each sub-area. Next slide, please. The Greater Washington region has experienced population growth since 2007-2008. The TPB region increased by about 300,000 households, from 1.8 million to 2.1 million households. Additionally, the region has added new high-capacity transit lines, such as the Metro Silver Line and the Metroway BRT line, expanded the express highway network, and added bicycle lanes and multi-use trails connecting the region. Next slide. We will start by looking at how household sizes have changed in the TPB region, since household size impacts household trip rates. You can see that household sizes have slightly increased, shown by the decrease in one-person households and the increase in 3 and 4 or more person households from 2007-2008 to 2017-2018. Next slide. One of the key findings from the survey is that households in the Washington region are taking fewer trips in 2017-2018 compared with 2007-2008. This reflects the national trend in declining household trip rates over the past decade. You can see from this chart that the weekday household trip rate in the TPB region declined from 8.9 to 8.3 trips per household. All subregions, including the core, the inner suburb, and the outer suburb, experienced significant decreases in the household trip rate, with larger declines in the inner and outer suburbs. Next slide. This chart shows the change in the weekday household trip rate by household size. You can see that there are larger decreases in household trips for larger households, especially for 3 and 4 more person households, and smaller decreases in 1 and 2 person households. Next slide. This chart shows the change in the household trip rate by vehicle availability from 2007-2008 to 2017-2018, which varied by the number of household vehicles. Households with no vehicles took more trips per household in 2017-2018, while households with 2 or more vehicles took fewer trips per household in 2017-2018. Next slide. We can see that there are also differences in trip rates by age group based on this chart, showing the change in the person trip rate between 2007-2008 and 2017-2018. We found that the largest decrease in trips were for persons under 35, with the largest percentage point decrease for persons aged 16 to 24. And persons aged 35 and older had more modest decreases in the trip rate. Next slide. To summarize the findings of the change in weekday household and person trip rates, we can see that households in the TPB region are taking fewer trips in 2017-2018 compared with 2007-2008. The decrease in trips per household was across all subregional areas, but more so in the inner and outer suburbs. The decline in household trip rates may be partially explained by the rise in online shopping and smartphone app-based delivery services, replacing trips to stores and restaurants during the past decade. Also, the decrease in daily weekday trips were mainly in households with 2 or more vehicles. This suggests that much of the decline in weekday trips were automobile trips. Households with no vehicles took slightly more trips in 2017-2018. Finally, there is a larger decrease in daily weekday trips for younger age groups, particularly for persons under 35. This suggests that younger age groups are staying at home more and not traveling as much, which may be due to the rise of smartphone apps and social media use. Next slide. Now we'll look at the change in mode share for all weekday trips across the TPB region and by sub-area from 2007-2008 to 2017-2018. The data points highlighted in yellow indicate significant negative changes, while positive changes are highlighted in green. Looking at differences in travel mode share for all trips in the TPB region, the share of rail transit trips has decreased since 2007-2008, and the share of bicycle and taxi and ride-hail trips increased in 2017-2018. It should be noted that the taxi and ride-hail numbers for 2007-2008 only included taxis, since ride-hail services were introduced later. However, drive-alone trips significantly decreased in the regional core, and the share of walk, bicycle, and taxi and ride-hail trips significantly increased. In the inner suburbs, bicycle and taxi and ride-hail increased. Next slide. Now we'll look at the change in mode share of commute trips for the region and by sub-area. Looking at differences in commute mode share in the TPB region, the share of commute trips by car, drive alone, drive others, and auto passenger has significantly decreased since 2007-2008. The share of non-auto modes, particularly bus transit, walk, bicycle, and taxi and ride-hail, has significantly increased. The decline in the share of auto trips was primarily in the core, and the share of rail transit trips, in addition to walk, bicycle, and taxi and ride-hail trips, also significantly increased in the core. The share of bicycle and taxi and ride-hail trips also increased in the inner suburbs. However, in the outer suburbs, the share of drive-alone trips increased while rail transit decreased. Next slide, please. To summarize the change in mode share of weekday trips, we found that the share of all bicycle trips dramatically increased throughout the TPB region, doubling since 2007-2008. And bicycle trip rates increased threefold in the regional core. It's quite remarkable. This is mainly due to the massive investment in bicycle infrastructure in the region and bike share programs such as Capital Bike Share, which launched in 2010 after the 2007-2008 survey. The share of rail transit trips declined across the TPB region, especially for non-commute trips. Metro rail ridership has been declining in recent years due to increased competition from other modes such as bicycle and ride-hailing. The share of bus transit, walk, bicycle, and taxi and ride-hail commute trips significantly increased in the region. This is likely due to increased investment in transit, walk, and bike infrastructure in the region, in addition to the rise of Uber and Lyft. In the regional core, the share of auto commutes significantly decreased, and the share of rail transit commutes significantly increased, which may reflect increases in transit services in the core. Next slide, please. So now we will look at some additional findings from the 2017-2018 RTS, focusing on trip length by mode and purpose. This chart shows the trip length distribution by travel mode for all trips, showing the median and the 25th, 75th, and 90th percentiles. We can see that the longest trips were on rail transit, followed by drive-alone trips, and bus transit trips were similar in distance to taxi and ride-hail trips. Next slide. Looking at the trip length distribution by travel mode for commute trips, we can see that drive-alone and rail transit were the longest trips by distance, and trips by rail transit were more than twice as long as trips by bus transit, which were similar to the distance of taxi and ride-hail trips. Next slide. Looking at the trip length distribution by travel mode for non-commute trips, we can see that non-commute trips were generally shorter in distance than commute trips. We can see that rail transit trips were the longest by distance, and drive-alone trips were much shorter in distance for non-commute trips compared with commute trips. Next slide. This chart shows differences in median trip length across subregional area. We can see that trip length increases from the core to the suburbs, with the shortest trip distances in the core and the longest trip distances in the outer suburbs. Also note that commute trips were significantly longer than non-commute trips. Next slide. This chart shows differences in median trip length by household income. We can see that trip length for commute trips increases with income. The highest income group has the longest commute distances. However, this trend does not hold for non-commute trips, which were similar in distance across income groups. Next slide. Now we'll look at distances and median trip length by race and ethnicity. We can see that trip lengths vary by racial and ethnic groups, but African Americans take longer trips by distance than other racial and ethnic groups. Next slide. We can also see from this chart that trip lengths increase with vehicle availability for both commute and non-commute trips. Households with no vehicles take the shortest trips, while households with 2 and 3 or more vehicles take significantly longer trips. Next slide, please. We also looked at how life stage influences the length of trips. Looking at this chart, we can see that the longest commute trips were taken by persons between age 35 and 74, while persons under age 35 take shorter commute trips. Differences in non-commute trip lengths by age group were minimal, however, compared with commute trip distances. Next slide. In terms of differences in trip length by gender, we can see from this chart that the median commute trip distance for males were longer than for females, while there were no differences in non-commute trip distances by gender. Next slide. We also compare differences in trip length for households with and without children. We can see from this chart that households with children have longer commute distances than households without children. Conversely, households without children took slightly longer non-commute trips than households with children. Next slide. Finally, we also examined trip length by purpose from the 2017-2018 survey. You can see that commute trips were the longest trips by distance, followed by work-related, social recreation, personal business, drop-off pickup, shop meal, and school trips. Next slide. To summarize the key findings of trip length distributions, for commute trips, drive-alone, and rail transit trips had the longest trip lengths. For non-commute trips, trip lengths are longest for rail transit. Trip length increases from the core to the outer suburbs. This may reflect differences in land use patterns since the suburbs are more auto-oriented and destination opportunities tend to be further away. Households with higher incomes tend to have further commutes with the longest trip lengths among households earning more than $150,000 a year. African Americans had further commutes than other racial and ethnic groups. This may reflect greater jobs housing mismatch for African Americans who are historically segregated from areas of opportunity. Trip lengths increase with vehicle availability. Households with more vehicles take longer trips. This shows that households without a vehicle are more geographically constrained in terms of where they can travel in the region, thereby taking shorter length trips. Life stage influences the length of trips, with persons between 35 and 74 having the furthest commutes. This roughly corresponds with members of Generation X and the baby boomer generation. Trip length varies by gender. Males have longer commute distances than females, and households with children have longer commute distances than households without children. Next slide, please. We have recently, over the past several months, been preparing the Regional Travel Survey public data files, and I'm excited to announce that the public data files have been recently released to the public. The data files include the household, person, vehicle, and trip information for the TPB model region. The public file release will include technical documentation, which is focused on post-survey data processing and survey expansion. It also provides an overview of the data files. Note that the public file release does not contain any personally identifiable information, which will protect the confidentiality of survey respondents. And the public use data set will be available upon request on the RTS website. Next slide. I'm also pleased to announce that the Regional Transportation Data Clearinghouse RTS tabulations are now available on the Regional Travel Survey webpage. Our staff prepared the RTDC RTS tabulations to provide an online resource for the RTS data to be used by our regional stakeholders. Tabulations include descriptive summaries of variables in the RTS household, person, vehicle, and trip files. These are first-level tabulations of the RTS data set that can be quickly pulled off the shelf when needed. The RTDC RTS tabulations include tabulations for the entire RTS universe, which includes TPB member jurisdictions and neighboring jurisdictions in the TPB model region. We have also prepared tabulations for jurisdiction, sub-regional areas, activity centers, and equity emphasis areas. We certainly understand the importance of providing access to the RTS data, and by sharing these tabulations with our stakeholders, we aim to provide an off-the-shelf resource that will help inform planning decisions and bolster our mission to promote equity and inclusivity in the region. Next slide. I would like to conclude by offering some final thoughts on the Regional Travel Survey. While the RTS provides the most recent and comprehensive picture of travel in the Washington region, it reflects travel in the region before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it does provide a baseline to compare with the post-COVID normal once we emerge out of the pandemic. Therefore, the RTS is still important and will serve our immediate purposes for travel forecasting, as well as providing a useful point of comparison with the new normal. As you are aware, we have recently released the results from the Voices of the Region survey, which focused on travel behavior and preferences during the COVID-19 pandemic and in the post-pandemic period. We will also likely conduct a future survey on regional travel patterns after the pandemic. Additionally, the RTS data will help us better address questions about transportation equity by examining the travel behavior of people of various racial and ethnic groups and income levels, allowing decision makers in the region to consider where it is important to invest in transportation options. Next slide. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Yu-Gao and Wanda Owens on our TPB staff who provided assistance in the data processing of the RTS trip file. I would also like to thank Yu-Gao for his assistance in preparing the tabulations for this presentation. Finally, I would like to thank Nicole McCall for her critical support on this effort. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joe. First, quick housekeeping for everybody. Since it's about 1:50, what we're going to do is move item number 12, the TPB Climate Change Mitigation Report. We're going to need to bump that till next month. It's a informational piece. but given our conversation earlier, it may be just a little longer conversation. I want to make sure that we don't run out of time on that. But it leaves us 10 or 15 minutes here with Dr. Joe. So just one quick question I had is, if you, before I turn to other jurisdictions, could you just also help crosswalk again a little bit more? This is evaluating 0708 to 1718, but obviously our world changed over the last year. There are some areas where this does provide a good baseline to kind of think about what it could look like and what will happen. But also there's some fundamentals that probably have changed moving forward. Could you just do a, again, trying to be cognizant of time, just very brief kind of crosswalk of what you think some of the key takeaways, recognizing our discussion from last month about a more intensive look at this last year?
Absolutely, Chair Allen. And, certainly, we realize that, the regional travel survey data, is, from 2017, 2018. And so, it captures the most recent, picture of travel in the region, right before the COVID-19 pandemic hit last year. So, certainly, there's without a doubt that travel behavior in the region has dramatically changed, not only in our region, but across the country and around the world. So, there are, certainly looking, forward, there will be some lasting impacts from the pandemic. There'll probably also be some reverting back to travel patterns and behaviors before the pandemic. So it'll be really interesting to compare the data from the regional travel survey with the future, post, COVID survey. But again, as I had stated, the regional travel survey data ultimately it provides input for developing our regional travel demand forecasts. So it's still relevant for providing those forecasts, but it's important to be cognizant of what the data from this survey tells us and what it doesn't.
Okay. I'll try to move through questions as quickly as we can. I'm going to turn to WMATA and agencies first. So I see Sham's hand up. So let me turn to you, Sham.
I wasn't aware. Is my hand still up? That's
oh yeah.
Oh, great. I'll take that down. Thank you, Dr. Joe, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Three quick things. Number one, as a unit, we tend to focus on congestion and the commute. And I think that we've seen now, not just one, not just two, 10, 20 years of data that remind us that the commute trip has long been the declining and shrinking slice of the pie, that the vast majority of trips that are taking place here are non-work trips. And that means that we have to be thinking about the entire day. At WMATA, that means we have to be thinking about making sure that we're providing sufficient and robust levels of service for the trips that take place at lunch and on weekends and at night. And during the middle of the day, people are going lots of other places. I hope that the work we do can also train our eyes on the type of mobility that we need to do that sustainably. The second thing I just want to hit on is, in that world of the commute trip that is, according to this data, less important, we also have to be cognizant of the disproportionate or the burden that are faced by minority communities in this region. It's sobering to look at the data and realize that we're giving our Black and Brown communities a transportation network which forces them to take more of their time away from their families, away from their houses of worship, away from their health to just get to places. And if we're not really committed to promoting a more inclusive and equitable region, this is a good data point to force us to do that. And the third thing, Mr. Chairman, I know we've moved agenda item 12 to the next TPB meeting. I hope that there can be some further introspection on that even prior to the meeting. I know that at every meeting, there's a point in time where we collectively express some dissatisfaction, and then we have to nod our heads and smile and go back to living with that dissatisfaction. I would contend that in the case of the planet, that's not good enough anymore. And I'm going to remain dissatisfied with the situation until we can resolve it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. And I actually agree with you. I think we can pick up our conversation from earlier today to have that So as we go into next month, we'll have a little something more there and try to think through. So I'm happy to follow between meetings with you as well on that. Thank you, Sean. Let me turn to Virginia next.
Mr. Chairman, it's Supervisor Alcorn, Fairfax County.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a couple quick things. First of all, Sham's comment, I think, was very good about the relative decrease in importance on commuter trips. Unfortunately, our WMATA revenue model is premised upon commuter trips and rush hour fares plus jurisdictional subsidies. That's a tough revenue model going forward, I think, and I'm understanding that's one of the things WMATA is going to be looking at going, for the longer term. And second, just Dr. fantastic presentation. Slides 13 and 14, I want to note, I think as some of us in communities that have been primarily suburban in terms of our land use are moving towards TOD and you can really tell the numbers, it's going to take a while for them to change, but they're starting to, compared to the core, we're still looking at a pretty sharp deficit in terms of transit trips as well as walking and biking. We're moving in the right direction, but anyway, thank you for letting us see how that's moving, at least over time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. More others from Virginia? Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks. I'm wondering how we're capturing remote work in this data, which is something that the region has supported and now we've seen really taken off during a pandemic year. And it's something to support, but I think that it creates both opportunities and challenges for both highway and transit planning. So I'm wondering if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, certainly. We did ask about the telecommute in the regional travel survey. Although, as others have noted, I mean, in terms of this survey, we were interested in capturing all trips, both work and non-work trips, and the majority of trips that are taken in the region are non-work trips. So, I mean, we did capture the telecommute, but we've also at the TPB at COG, we have other surveys like the State of the Commute survey that focuses on the commute to work and telecommute.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me turn to Maryland if I can.
Hi, Patrick Lyon from College Park. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think as we look at and focus on equity in this region, I think the one of the key things we should look at, and I'm wondering if you can touch on this in more depth, is the breakdown of by race and by income of mode use. I appreciate the information on length of trip, but I do think that would be helpful in terms of how we invest in our region and making sure that we are investing equitably, that we look at what how the mode share breaks down between different groups and how accessible that different modes are, multimodal transportation is for different ethnic group, racial and ethnic groups and different income levels. I wonder if you might comment on that.
Yes, I appreciate your comment. And certainly the results from this survey has obvious equity implications. And so, I mean, we have examined actually differences in the mode share, by race and ethnicity. And we've also, as I shared with you in the presentation, look at the differences in the commute trip length. So, I mean, certainly with the data that we have, we can, examine, these differences in how people are traveling the region by, race and ethnicity and by income. And I mean, that is one of the most important findings, in my opinion, from this survey is looking at how we can better inform and plan for better equity in the Washington region from examining these data. But thank you for bringing that point.
Thank you. I saw Ms. Costick had her hand up. And then I see, let's see, I see Councilmember Taveras. Is there anybody else from Maryland? Okay. All right, well, we go Ms. Costick, then Ms. Taveras.
Thank you. Just very quickly, thank you very much for all of this data. I think it is really informative and useful in our consideration of all of our work on transportation. And I want to echo some of the comments that have been made with regard to the importance of the data in terms of the racial inequities in the region and as well the East-West divide. Just two quick items. One was you mentioned the declining household trip rates and that possibly being due to increased delivery through Amazon and other services. And I'm wondering if there is a measure that is taken somewhere else that looks at the number of delivery trips that are happening and kind of the impact of what that has on congestion and emissions and other things in our region. And then separate from that, wondering a little bit about the issue of correlation and causation and how we glean what's causing the changes that are happening in the region and what we can do with this data to sort of extract some of the causes that we might want to build on or we might want to mitigate.
Absolutely. Those are great, excellent questions. Thank you. On your first question, with respect to delivery services and impacts on trips, I mean, certainly home delivery services are, maybe substituting, some trips that would have otherwise been taken. The regional travel survey was a household travel survey, so we focus exclusively on trips taken by households living in, by residents in the region. So we did not, this survey did not explicitly look at, trips that were taken by, commercial, vehicles and deliveries. However, we did ask in the survey questions about, home delivery services and frequency of delivery services in the region. And I believe I shared the results from that in an earlier presentation, but one out of 3 households in the TPB region on any given weekday has a home delivery service, something delivered to the house. So with that, certainly underscores the importance of home delivery services. And then in terms of your second point, with respect to correlation versus causality, I really appreciate that as a statistician. Certainly correlation does not equate to causation. And so whenever we are looking at data for travel behavior, describing travel behavior and travel patterns, and it's certainly worthwhile to investigate, to look at these numbers and to interpret these numbers with some caution, because there could be other factors that are not explicitly accounted for that may explain, these, differences or changes in travel patterns. So yeah, certainly it's, we could certainly, speculate, or there could be possible reasons, but yeah, I think it is important, to be careful not to overstate the results.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Councilmember Taveras.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think that, I think you're doing amazing work, but I think that there is a factor when we look at the changing demographics of how African Americans have been pushed out of DC, the affordability of housing, and that's reflected in the fact that African Americans have to commute longer. I mean, would you agree?
Yes, I think that's certainly a factor that could explain the longer distance for commute trips.
I mean, the gentrification that's occurred within the DC area. And I think that the reflection of the increased density, I know at least in my district, I have the highest level of density, if not, I know definitely in the county, definitely in this, it could be even in the state. where because individuals and at least, foreign-born individuals tend to concentrate, in the fringes, they tend to live intergenerationally. And so because of that, you might see, as you could see there was greater usage among Hispanics and whatnot. But anyway, my question is that your data does show that there is less ridership overall within WMATA, and that's a clear trend over time because there's been increased competition from other other modes of transportation. And so the question is the maintenance of WMATA and these public service, public transportation options comes at a higher cost, but there will be a steady decrease in ridership. Do you see that plateauing point, or maybe, this may sound radical, public transportation becoming obsolete and it's just going to be a huge, cost burden for jurisdictions?
Currently, the numbers show that rail transit trips have declined in the region. And that's associated with the decline in ridership. This also reflects a national trend. During this period, because of increasing numbers of trips that are being taken by alternative modes, such as bicycling and taxiing ride-hail, the majority of transportation in the U.S. have experienced transit ridership decline.
I think your mic was breaking up a little bit there, Dr. Joe, but Dr. Tavares, did you get the answer that you were?
But so that this is in essence that to me, what I'm walking away with, Dr. Joe, is that this is a national problem that we're facing in terms of addressing, and I think that it will be a cost burden across within the federal government and respective jurisdictions to continue to maintain, unless there is a critical mass of individuals that, unless you're in a particular area like New York or Chicago, that depends on that to move people.
Mr. Chair.
A critical mass of people. So,
Mr. Chair, if I could say,
sure.
The data that Ken has presented is looking back past 10 years. There's a lot that is happening within the socioeconomic system that has affected a lot of things. I think particularly within our region, there was a lot going on. I think if you begin to see metro rail ridership and metro service ridership had been increasing right up to the pre-pandemic period. So there are swings, but we are beginning to see telecommuting increase significantly. And we have some data that shows a significant percent of people who telework do ride transit. So there is that interrelation between those two. But in terms of future, if I might say, I don't believe that this region's transportation system will work or can work, or this region can really realize the growth that it is anticipating without transit. Public transportation, the investments have not been adequate in the past. That was manifest in the 3 states coming together and committing to additional dedicated revenue. I completely agree that the funding model needs to be looked at, but that is not the same as saying it is a cost burden. It is going to be cost-effective modes of transportation. It just needs to be looked at from the perspective of what is the investment on the return it can provide, not just to mobility and accessibility, but also to our environmental and other goals as well. So I think projecting into the future, we can't simply take on this data, but this is part of what is informing our future projections.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point, Conti. I think that probably since it's a little after 10 minutes after 2, we should probably start to wrap up here. But I think that is a really important way to kind of help wrap that up and end that, Conti. And I think we all recognize, at least I think we do, how absolutely crucial our transit system is to the entire region, and how absolutely crucial transit is going to be in the recovery for our region. And so there's a lot of hard work ahead. I know that's going to be one of the focal points we spent a lot of time on this year. And the last 3 months, we've really had some absolutely fantastic data and analysis that has helped kind of lay some groundwork for us. Each one of them, they can't stand alone. Each one of them is related to each other. Each one of them is a piece of information that we can then start to incorporate that then helps us think through where we are headed from there. So on that note, Dr. Joe, I'll kind of wrap this part up. So thank you very much for the presentation. We may still have some more follow-up questions, and I'll ask my colleagues if we do have some follow-ups, let's make sure we reach out to Conti, Dr. Joe, and team via email or other ways to make sure we get any additional feedback and questions that you have. So we'll do that. Again, I'll note that the item number 12, which we've run out of time for, which was a relatively short item, but I have a hunch based on our conversation earlier today, it might be a little bit longer conversation. We're going to move that to next month. And then, as I think a couple of colleagues had pointed out to me, we probably can have some conversation between now and then to make sure that we get the most out of that conversation when we come back together again. So the time is now 12:12. Conti, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn.
Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. All right, thank you everybody for your time. Thanks for your hard work today. Great discussions, and look forward to seeing everybody soon. Stay safe, and we are now adjourned.
Good job, Leo. Woohoo.
Thank you.
Did you run into any issues other than Ariana coming on and off?
No, it was fine. This meeting went well.
Cool. Great. You were ready.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to go. Talk to you later.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.